The scanner had been pinging for almost an hour, before Elias Barrow decided to do something about it. He sat in the cockpit of his ship, a beaten and scarred scout vessel called La Piedad, and he stared at the blinking light on his console, with the tired eyes of a man who had not slept in 2 days. His coffee was cold, and his back ached, and the last salvage run had earned him barely enough credits to keep the reactor fed for another month. He did not need another detour. He did not need another problem. But the signal kept pinging. It was a biosignal, which meant it was not cargo or wreckage or some forgotten drone drifting through the black. It was alive, whatever it was, and it was coming from the surface of Acheron 7, a dwarf planet so far from any trade lane that most star maps did not even bother to name it. The planet sat at the very edge of council-controlled space, a place where nobody went unless they were lost or unless they were hiding. Elias rubbed his eyes and made his decision, face with both hands, and swore quietly under his breath. Then he adjusted his heading and took La Piedad down toward the surface. The world below was ugly, a pale gray expanse of dust and shattered rock stretched in every direction, broken only by the jagged teeth of ancient craters. The wind howled across the flats and carried with it a fine grit that scraped against the hull like sandpaper. And scattered across a wide valley, half buried in dust and silence, lay the remains of a convoy. Elias counted the wrecks as he flew low over the debris field. 4 ships, maybe 5, all of them torn apart by weapons fire. He recognized the design immediately. The elegant curved hulls, the crystal-laced plating that caught even the faint light of the distant sun. These were Veltari ships, diplomatic class by the look of them. Which made no sense at all, because the Veltari did not fly diplomatic ships into places like this. He brought La Piedad down beside the largest wreck, cruiser that had broken nearly in half on impact. The dust had already begun to swallow it, creeping up the sides like a slow tide. Elias pulled on his environment suit, checked his oxygen, grabbed his cutting torch and his field kit, and stepped out into the wind. Parent tab. The biosignal was coming from deep inside the cruiser. It took him 20 minutes to cut his way through the outer hull. The interior was dark and cold, and the emergency lighting had long since died. He moved through corridors that were buckled and torn, stepping over shattered panels and drifts of crystalline debris that crunched under his boots. The Velthari built their ships with living crystal woven into the structure, and when the ship died, the crystal died with it. The fragments under his feet had once been beautiful. Now they were just broken glass. He found the escape pod bay first and stopped. Every pod was gone. Every single one had been launched. He checked the deployment logs on a terminal that still had a flicker of power remaining, and what he found made his stomach turn cold. The manifest listed 14 crew members. 14 pods had launched. 14 names had been checked off the evacuation list. But the biosignal was still pinging, which meant someone was still here, which meant someone had been left behind. He scrolled through the manifest again, slower this time, and then he saw it. A name had been on the list and then removed. Not lost, not corrupted, deliberately struck from the record. Someone had manually deleted a crew member from the evacuation manifest before the pods launched. Someone had made sure that whoever was still in this ship would not be rescued. Elias felt something cold settle in his chest, something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but lived somewhere between the two. He tightened his grip on the cutting torch and followed the biosignal deeper into the wreck. He found her in what had once been the medical. She was pinned beneath a collapsed bulkhead, a massive slab of metal and crystal that had fallen across her lower body. The first thing he noticed was the blood, except it was not red. It was pale and translucent, almost like water, with a faint shimmer of light running through it, and there was a lot of it pooled on the floor around her. The second thing he noticed was her skin, or what the Velthari had instead of skin. Their bodies were covered in a lattice of living crystal, delicate and luminous, that served as both armor and sensory organ. Hers was shattered. The left side of her body was a web of cracks and breaks, and the bioluminescent patterns that should have been glowing softly across her surface were nearly dark. She looked like a stained glass window that someone had taken a hammer to. She was breathing, but only barely. Elias knelt beside her and set down his kit. The air in here was thin but breathable, which meant the compartment had held its seal. Somehow, he reached out carefully and touched her shoulder. Her eyes opened. They were large and dark, with flecks of light swimming in their depths, like stars reflected in deep water. And they locked onto him with an intensity that made his breath catch. Then she flinched, hard, and a sound came from her that was somewhere between a gasp and a cry. Not from the pain of his touch, but from something else. He learned later that it was his mind. The Valtari were telepaths, every one of them. They perceived the world through a constant web of psychic impressions, reading the emotional states and surface thoughts of every living creature around them. Their own minds were structured and elegant, like music, and human minds were none of those things. To a Valtari telepath, a human mind was noise, a roaring, churning, overwhelming storm of raw emotion and fragmented thought and unfiltered sensation, all broadcasting at full volume with no structure and no restraint. Was like standing next to a bonfire when you had spent your whole life in candlelight. She tried to pull away from him and failed, because the bulkhead had her trapped. She made a low sound of distress, and her cracked crystal flickered with a weak, frightened light. Elias held up both hands, palms open, the universal gesture of no harm. "Easy," he said, and his voice was calm and steady, even though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "I am not going to hurt you. I am here to help." She stared at him. Her dark eyes searched his face, and he knew, somehow, that she was searching more than just his face. She was reading him, or trying to, pushing through the storm of his mind to find his intentions. And whatever she found there must not have been enough, because she looked at him with an expression that he recognized from every species he had ever encountered. It was the look of someone who expected to be left behind again. "Listen to me," leaned closer, holding her gaze. "I am not going anywhere. I am going to cut this beam off of you, and I am going to carry you to my ship, and you are going to live. Do you understand me?" She did not answer. She could not, perhaps, or did not believe him. Elias picked up his cutting torch and got to work. The ship's reactor was unstable. He could hear it groaning somewhere deep in the hull, a low and ugly sound that meant heat was building where heat should not build. He had maybe 40 minutes before the whole wreck became a very large and very brief sun. 40 minutes to cut through a ton of twisted metal and carry an alien woman he had never met back to his ship across a frozen wasteland in a dying wind. Elias set his jaw and began to cut. He had always been stubborn. It was, he sometimes thought, the only truly remarkable thing about him. He was not the smartest, or the strongest, or the fastest. He was just the man who did not stop. And the sparks flew like angry stars, and somewhere behind him the reactor groaned again, louder this time, hungrier. And Elias did not stop. She screamed when he lifted her, and the scream was not just sound. It hit Elias like a physical blow, a wave of raw agony that slammed into his skull and turned his vision white for a terrible second. He staggered, but he did not drop her. He gritted his teeth so hard he thought they might crack, and he held on, and he kept walking through the broken corridors of the dying ship, with her cradled against his chest like something precious and shattered. He made it to La Piedad with 4 minutes to spare. The reactor blew 90 seconds after he sealed the airlock, and even through the hull plating, he felt the heat of it wash over the ship like a giant hand shoving them forward. La Piedad skidded across the dust, and then her engines caught, and Elias pulled them up and away from the expanding fireball, and into the cold safety of open space. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. He laid her on the floor of the cargo bay because he did not have a medical bed. Not have much of anything, really. La Piedad was a salvage ship, not a hospital, and her medical supplies consisted of a basic human first aid kit, some painkillers that would probably poison a Velthari, and a diagnostic scanner that was designed for engine components rather than living patients. But she was alive, and that was a start. Her name was Kaelin Surith. He learned this not because she told him, but because she could not stop broadcasting it. Her damaged crystal lattice had lost the ability to filter her telepathic output, which meant that everything inside her mind was spilling outward in ragged, uncontrolled waves, pain and memory and identity and fear, all tangled together and pouring into the only mind nearby, his mind. It was, Elias decided, like standing in a hurricane made of someone else's worst day. The pain was the worst of it, a sharp and splintering agony that mapped itself onto his own body in phantom echoes. He felt the ghost of her fractures. Along his ribs, across his arm, down the length of his left leg. None of it was real, but all of it was convincing, and there was no way to shut it out, because he was not a telepath, and he had no shields, and she could not control what she was sending. He did not complain. He did not even mention it. He just winced sometimes when a particularly bad wave hit him, and then he went back to work. He cleaned her wounds first, as best he could. The translucent fluid that served as Velthari blood had a faint luminescence to it, and it got everywhere, on his hands, his clothes, the floor of the cargo bay. He used water and clean rags, because he did not know what chemicals might react badly with her biology. And the first rule of medicine, as far as he understood it, was to not make things worse. Then he sat down at his console and started reading. The Galactic Medical Database had a section on Velthari physiology that was about 400 pages long, and written in the kind of dense, technical language that made his head hurt, even without the telepathic noise. He read it anyway, all of it, cross-referencing what he read with what he could see on her body, and what his mining scanner could tell him about the structure of her crystal lattice. The news was not good. Her lattice was fractured in at least 40 places. The fractures were not just physical damage. Each one disrupted the flow of energy through her body, and that energy was what kept a Velthari alive. It was like a human losing blood, except you could not just pour more in. The lattice had to be realigned, each fragment coaxed back into its proper resonance frequency, or the cracks would spread and her whole system would collapse. The database said this procedure required a Velthari resonance chamber, 3 trained crystal surgeons, and approximately 2 weeks of constant attention. The nearest Velthari medical facility was 8 weeks away at La Piedad's best speed. The screen for a long time. Then he stood up and walked to his engine room and started taking things apart. Over the next 6 hours, he built something that was not a resonance chamber, but was the closest thing he could manage. He stripped the harmonic dampeners from his ship's drive system, which meant the engine would shake badly until he replaced them. But that was a problem for later. He wired the dampeners into a frame made from cargo struts and calibrated them using frequencies he pulled from the medical database. He used his mining scanner as a guide, mapping the crystal fractures and calculating the resonance needed for each one. It was not elegant, it was not precise. It was a piece of mining equipment held together with cable ties and desperate mathematics. But when he activated it and held it near the worst of her fractures, the crystal responded. The fragments shifted, just slightly, and the hairline cracks began to close, and a faint glow returned to them. Lattice where there had been only dark. Kaelin gasped, and her eyes flew open, and for the first time, the wave that hit Elias was not pain. It was surprise. He worked through the night, and through the next day, and through the night after that. He slept in snatches, 20 minutes here and 30 minutes there, sitting on the floor beside her with his back against the cargo bay wall. When she cried out, he held her hand, even though every time he touched her, the telepathic storm intensified, and his skull felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. On the third day she was lucid enough to speak. "Why?" she said, and her voice was like wind chimes in a slow breeze, soft and musical, even when it was rough with pain. "Why are you doing this?" Elias was recalibrating the makeshift resonance device, and he did not look up right away. He was tired beyond anything he had ever known, and his hands were shaking slightly, and there was a bruise on his temple from where he had walked into a doorframe while half-blinded by one of her psychic broadcasts. "Because you needed help," he said. "That is not a reason," she said. "You are human. You have no alliance with my people. There is no profit in this for you. There is no obligation, no debt, no treaty. Your species has no connection to mine that would demand this." Elias finally looked at her. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, and there were shadows under them deep enough to hide in. But his gaze was steady. "You were hurt," he said. "You were alone. That is enough." She stared at him, and he felt the telepathic equivalent of someone trying to solve a puzzle that should not exist. She was searching his mind for the hidden motive, the secret agenda, the calculation behind the kindness. And she was finding nothing, because there was nothing to find. In her experience, in the experience of every Velthari who had ever lived, empathy was a shared thing. You felt what others felt, responded to that feeling. It was automatic, instinctive, woven into the very structure of their crystal minds. The idea that someone could help another creature without feeling their pain, without any telepathic connection, without any proof that the other being was even worth saving, it did not fit into any framework she had. "I do not understand you," she whispered. "That is okay," Elias said. "You do not have to understand me. You just have to let me help." Through her broken lattice, in fragments and flashes that came without warning, Elias learned what had happened to her. He saw a face, sharp and angular and proud, with crystal plating that gleamed like polished silver, and he felt the name attached to it. Archon Drael, commander of the convoy, a figure of immense political authority among the Velthari. He saw Kalen standing in a cargo hold, staring at rows of sealed containers that hummed with a frequency that made her lattice ache. Recognized what was inside. Bioweapons, Class 7 restricted, the kind of thing that could sterilize a planet's ecosystem in a matter of days. They were hidden in the belly of a diplomatic ship, shielded from scanners by the very treaty protections that were supposed to guarantee peace. He saw her confronting Drael. He felt the cold dismissal, the quiet threat, the moment when she realized that the most powerful voice in her convoy had decided she was a problem to be erased, rather than a person to be heard. And he saw the attack, the pirates that came out of nowhere and hit the convoy with surgical precision, the chaos and fire and the terrible sound of crystal shattering. And he saw the moment when every escape pod launched, and hers did not. And he felt the loneliness of that, the absolute, crushing silence of being deliberately forgotten. Elias sat with that knowledge for a while. He sat with the anger that came with it, the slow and heavy kind of anger that settles into your bones and does not leave. Then he reached for his console and began composing an encrypted message. "What are you doing?" Kalen asked. "Making sure he does not get away with it," Elias said. She looked at him, and through the fading static of her uncontrolled broadcasts, he felt something new from her. Something fragile and uncertain, and trembling like a candle flame in a draft. It took him a moment to recognize it, because it had been buried so deep under all the pain and fear that he had almost missed it. It was hope. She had not felt it in a very long time. 2 weeks passed in the slow crawl between stars. La Piedad was not a fast ship, even at her best. And now, with her harmonic dampeners stripped out and repurposed into a medical device, she shook and rattled through space like a tin can rolling down a hill. Elias spent his mornings patching whatever new thing had come loose overnight, and his afternoons tending to Kalen, and his evenings staring at star charts and calculating whether they had enough fuel to reach Meridian Station before something critical broke. They did, but only barely. Kalen was healing. The fractures in her crystal lattice were closing one by one, each repaired segment bringing back a little more light to her surface, and a little more control to her telepathy. The wild, unfiltered broadcasts that had been hammering Elias for days gradually became softer, more focused, until they were less like a storm and more like a conversation happening in the next room, one he could not quite make out, but could no longer ignore. She could sit up now. She could stand if she was careful. She could walk the short distance from the cargo bay to the cockpit, though she needed to rest when she got there, and she would lower herself into the co-pilot seat with the slow caution of someone who had learned not to trust her own body. It was during these walks that they began to talk. Kalen asked him about Earth, and he told her. He told her about oceans, which fascinated her, because the Veltari homeworld had no large bodies of water. He told her about rain, and she made him describe it 3 times, because the idea of water falling from the sky seemed to her like something out of a dream. He told her about forests and mountains and cities full of millions of people living on top of each other in towers of glass and steel, and she listened with her dark eyes wide and her damaged crystal flickering with faint colors that he was beginning to learn were expressions of emotion. Curiosity green meant calm. A pale shifting violet meant she was thinking hard about something. And when she looked at him, sometimes, there was a warm amber glow that he did not yet have a name for. In return, she told him about the Veltari. She told him about the crystal gardens of her homeworld, vast living structures that grew over centuries and sang in frequencies that could be felt in the bones. She told him about the telepathic web that connected every Veltari to every other, a shared awareness that meant no Veltari was ever truly alone, except her. She was alone now, cut off from the web by distance and damage, and he could feel the ache of that isolation in the faint impressions she still could not fully control. "It must be terrible," Elias said one evening, as they sat in the cockpit, watching the stars drift past. "Being cut off like that." Kalen was quiet for a moment. Her crystal shifted through shades of gray, which he had learned meant sadness. "It was," she said, "at first, but I have learned something strange in these weeks." "What is that?" "Your mind is very loud," she said, and there was something almost like amusement in her voice. "It is messy and chaotic, and it has no structure at all. It is like listening to every instrument in an orchestra playing a different song at the same time." "Sorry about that," Elias said. "Do not apologize. I was going to say that I have gotten used to it, and more than that, I have begun to understand it." She turned to look at him, and the amber glow in her crystal was stronger now. "Among my people, empathy is a sense, like sight or hearing. We feel what others feel because our lattice picks up their emotional resonance automatically. We do not choose to be empathic. We simply are." She paused, and her crystal flickered with that shifting violet of deep thought. "You cannot do this. You cannot feel what I feel. Your mind has no telepathic capacity at all. Yet, you help me. You endure my pain without any ability to share it. You treat my wounds without any instinctive understanding of my biology. You sit with me through the worst of it, and you do not leave." She leaned forward slightly. "Elias, do you understand what this means among my people? It means nothing, because they have never seen it. They do not have a word for it. They cannot imagine empathy that is not automatic, that is not built into the structure of the mind. But I have seen it now, and I think it is the most extraordinary thing I have ever encountered." "I just did what anyone would do," Elias said. "No," Kaylin said, and her voice was firm. "You did what a human would do, and that is not the same thing." I have traveled to 12 worlds, and met 47 species, and not one of them would have done what you did. Not because they are cruel, but because they are rational. You are not rational, Elias. You are something else entirely. Was a compliment, but the amber in her crystal was very bright, so he decided to take it as one. But there was no time to dwell on it, because the universe, as always, had other plans. Elias had been monitoring galactic news feeds since the day he pulled Kalen from the wreck, and what he found made his jaw tighten with a cold and careful anger. Archon Drail had filed the convoy's destruction as a pirate attack with no survivors. Kalen was listed as killed in action. Her name had been added to a memorial wall on the Velthari homeworld. She was officially dead. And Drail was now en route to a council summit on the neutral world of Vathanar, where he was scheduled to sign a sweeping new arms limitation treaty. A treaty that would give him and his office expanded diplomatic immunity, and effectively make him untouchable for any crimes committed under his authority. The summit was in 6 weeks. He is going to bury it, Elias said, staring at the newsfeed with hard. He is going to sign that treaty, and then nobody will ever be able to touch him for what he did to you or what he is smuggling in those ships. Kalen's crystal went pale, almost white, which meant fear. Then there is nothing to be done, she said quietly. He is an Archon. He has the full weight of the Velthari diplomatic corps behind him. I am one damaged medic with a broken lattice and a dead woman's name. What can I possibly do against that? Elias looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled, and it was not a gentle smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found something worth fighting for. You have the truth, he said, and you have a voice. Where I come from, that is enough to bring down empires. He turned to his console and began working. He pulled up every piece of data he had collected, the salvage logs from the wreck, the falsified evacuation manifest, the medical scans showing the precise age and nature of Kalen's injuries, deployment records proving that her escape pod had been manually locked. He organized it and encrypted it and began sending copies to every contact he had in the human diplomatic corps, every journalist he had ever traded drinks with, every independent watchdog organization that owed him a favor or might want a story big enough to shake the galaxy. What are you doing? Kalen asked, and her crystal was flickering rapidly between violet and amber and pale white fear. Building a case, Elias said. Drail thinks you are dead. He thinks the evidence died with that ship. He is wrong on both counts, and I am going to make sure every person in this galaxy knows it. They will come for us, Kalen said. When he finds out I am alive, he will send people to silence me. Probably, Elias agreed. And that does not frighten you. Elias paused. He turned to look at her, and she felt the storm of his mind surge with something fierce and bright, something that burned like a beam. Star going nova. I am terrified, he said honestly, but I found you in the dark, and I made you a promise, and I do not break my promises. So, we are going to Meridian Station, and we are going to make so much noise that the whole galaxy has to listen. At that exact moment, the long-range scanner chimed. Elias looked at the display and his expression went very still. A ship had appeared at the edge of sensor range, moving slowly through the Acheron debris field in a systematic search pattern. It was Velthari military configuration, a patrol craft, fast and well-armed. Someone already knew Kalen might be alive. Meridian Station hung in the void like a city that had forgotten it needed a planet. It was enormous, a sprawling tangle of docking rings and habitat modules and market corridors that had been bolted together over centuries by dozens of species who could not agree on architecture but could agree on the value of a good trade deal. It was neutral ground, the kind of place where enemies could sit at the same bar and pretend they did not want to kill each other, and it was the busiest port in the outer sectors. Elias brought La Piedad in on a freight approach vector, tucked between two massive cargo haulers. because he did not want to announce their arrival to anyone who might be watching. The patrol ship in the Acheron belt had not followed them, or if it had lost their trail in the dense traffic around the station. But Elias was not foolish enough to think they were safe. He had dealt with powerful people before. He knew that powerful people did not give up. They simply changed tactics. He was right. Within 6 hours of docking, Kaylin picked up a telepathic signature she recognized, cold, precise, and utterly without warmth. It belonged to an operative named Sarath, one of Archon Drael's personal enforcers. Kaylin felt the mind moving through the station like a blade through water, searching, probing, sweeping the telepathic environment for any trace of a Velthari who was supposed to be dead. "He has people here," Kaylin said, and her crystal had gone the pale white of deep fear. "Elias, he already has people on this station." "I know," Elias said. He was sitting at a terminal in a rented communications booth in the lower market district, and his fingers were moving across the controls with a speed and purpose that seemed at odds with his usual calm. "I figured he would. That is why we are not going to hide." "What do you mean?" "I mean that hiding is what he expects us to do. Expects me to be cautious, and he expects us to try to slip away quietly. And that is exactly the kind of thing that gets people killed in dark corridors. So we are going to do the opposite." Kaylin stared at him. The opposite of hiding? Elias looked up and grinned, and there was something wild in his eyes, something reckless and fierce that she had felt burning in his mind for days, but had never seen on his face until now. "We are going to be the loudest thing on this station," he said. He started with the journalists. Meridian Station had a thriving independent press because neutral ground attracted the kind of reporters who liked asking dangerous questions. Elias contacted everyone he could find: human, Velthari, Karathi, Delphine. It did not matter. He sent them encrypted data packages containing the evidence he had compiled. And he told them what it contained, and he told them that a press conference would be held in the main concourse in 4 hours. Contacted the whistleblower networks, the decentralized information collectives that existed on every species data networks, specifically to make sure that powerful people could not make inconvenient truths disappear. He uploaded Kaylin's testimony, recorded in her own voice, backed by medical evidence and salvage data, to 17 different networks simultaneously across 3 species internets. Then he did something that nobody expected. He walked into the Velthari consulate on Meridian Station. The consulate was a beautiful space, all curved crystal walls and soft light, and it was staffed by 6 diplomats who looked at Elias with the polite bewilderment of people who had never had a human walk through their door before. Elias stood in the center of the reception hall, in front of all 6 of them, and he formally requested asylum for Kaylin Surith under the Human Xeno Refugee Compact. The compact was old, nearly a century old in fact, written in the early days of human contact with the galactic community as a gesture of goodwill that nobody had ever expected to actually be used. It stated that any sapient being who faced persecution by their own species could request protection from the human diplomatic corps, and that such protection would be granted pending a full investigation. Nobody had ever invoked it for a Velthari citizen. The idea that one of the galaxy's most advanced and telepathically gifted species would seek protection from humans, the loud, chaotic, mentally unshielded newcomers to the galactic stage, was politically unthinkable, which was exactly why Elias did it. The consulate staff were stunned. The news hit the station feeds within the hour, and the galactic networks within 3. It was the kind of story that spread like fire because it asked a question that everyone wanted answered. What could possibly have happened to make a Velthari citizen trust a human over her own people? Galaxy was asking that question. Elias made sure they got the answer. The press conference was standing room only. Kaylin stood beside Elias in the main concourse, her damaged crystal lattice visible for everyone to see. The fracture lines, the dimmed bioluminescence, the scars of a betrayal that had nearly killed her. She told her story in a clear and steady voice, while Elias projected the evidence on screens behind them. The falsified manifest, the locked escape pod, the bioweapon signatures, the timeline that proved beyond any doubt that Archon Drael had tried to murder one of his own crew to protect his secret. The galaxy watched, and the galaxy listened. But Drael was not finished. The response came fast, faster than Elias had expected. A shuttle arrived at Meridian Station, bearing Velthari military markings, and a diplomatic authorization that claimed authority over any Velthari citizen on the station. The team that emerged was not diplomatic. 6 of them, moving through the corridors with the efficient grace of people trained to end problems quietly. Their orders, filed officially, were to retrieve a Velthari fugitive, who had been declared mentally compromised due to crystal damage, and was spreading dangerous misinformation under the influence of an unauthorized human contact. Elias heard about the team from a bartender he had tipped generously 3 hours earlier. He had exactly 11 minutes to prepare. He sent Kalen to a safe room in the human quarter, a section of the station where Velthari military had no jurisdiction. And then he walked to the docking bay where the strike team shuttle had landed. He walked alone. He was unarmed. He wore no armor. He carried nothing but a small communications device clipped to his collar that was broadcasting a live feed to every screen on the station and half the news networks in the sector. The strike team saw him coming and fanned out into a smoke docking tactical formation, which was impressive and intimidating and completely useless against a single man who was not fighting. Elias stopped 10 meters from the team leader, a tall Veltari with silver crystal plating and cold eyes. He stood in the center of the corridor with his hands at his sides, and he looked directly into the team leader's face. "I know why you are here," Elias said, and his voice was calm, the kind of calm that comes not from an absence of fear, but from a decision made so completely that fear becomes irrelevant. "You are here to take Kalen Sarith. You are here to make her disappear again, the way your Archon made her disappear the first time." The team leader's crystal shifted, a ripple of cold blue that meant controlled anger. "You are interfering with a lawful retrieval operation, human. Step aside." "No," Elias said. "You have no authority here." "I do not need authority," Elias said. "I have a camera, and right now, about 40 million. People across this sector are watching you through it, so here is what is going to happen. You can take her. You have the guns and the training, and I cannot stop you physically. But you will do it in front of the whole galaxy, and everyone watching will know exactly what you are hiding, and exactly what your Archon is afraid of." He paused and let that settle. "Or you can turn around and walk back to your shuttle, and tell Drael that the universe got a little too small for his secrets. And then we can settle this the right way, in a court, with evidence, where the truth cannot be locked in an escape pod and left to die." The team leader stared at him. For a long moment, nobody moved. The corridor was silent, except for the hum of the station's systems, and the quiet, steady breathing of a human being who was more frightened than he had ever been in his life. Kalen was watching from a screen in the safe room. She could not feel Elias from this distance, but she did not need telepathy to see what was happening. She could see his hands. He was holding them very still at his sides, and they were not shaking, but she knew. She knew with a certainty that went deeper than telepathy, that every cell in his body was screaming at him to run. He did not run. He stood in that corridor, one ordinary man against 6 trained soldiers, and he bet everything on the belief that the truth, spoken loudly enough, was more powerful than any weapon. The team leader looked at the camera on Elias's collar. Then he looked at his own team. Then he turned and looked back toward the shuttle. "This is not over," the team leader said. "No," Elias agreed. "It is not. But from now on, it happens in the light." The team withdrew. 12 hours later, under pressure from independent media, allied governments, and a rapidly growing public outcry, the Velthari Council agreed to convene an emergency tribunal to investigate the accusations against Archon. Drael was recalled from the summit, but he was not going quietly, and he had one final card to play. The Council of Voices was the oldest structure on the Velthari homeworld. It had been grown, not built, over a span of 3,000 years, a cathedral of living crystal that rose from the bedrock of the planet like a frozen forest of light. Every surface sang with a low harmonic resonance that could be felt in the chest, and the walls were alive with shifting colors that responded to the emotions of everyone inside. The chamber was designed for one purpose: truth. The crystal amplified telepathic output so powerfully that every thought, every memory, every hidden intention was laid bare before the assembled judges. In this place, no one could lie. Kaylin stood at the center of the chamber, and she was afraid. She could feel the minds of the 12 council judges pressing against hers, vast and ancient and brilliant, their combined telepathic awareness like a deep ocean surrounding a small boat. She could feel the hundreds of observers in the gallery above, curiosity and skepticism and barely concealed political calculations radiating downward like heat. She could feel Archon Drael, seated across the chamber in the place reserved for the accused, his mind a fortress of cold silver confidence. And she could feel, very faintly, from a waiting room outside the chamber where non-telepaths were required to stay, the distant storm of a human mind. Elias was here. He could not be in the chamber because humans could not participate in the Council of Voices. His mind was unstructured and unreadable by Velthari standards, and there was no legal precedent for allowing a non-telepath to give testimony in a proceeding that depended entirely on telepathic verification. Drael knew this. It was his final card. He had not denied the charges, not directly. Denial was impossible in the Council of Voices, where every lie lit up like a signal fire. Instead, he had built his defense around a single argument. Kaylin's testimony was unreliable. Crystal Lattice had been severely damaged. Her telepathic abilities had been compromised for weeks, and during those weeks, she had been in constant close contact with a human mind, an unshielded, unstructured, chaotic human mind that had been pouring its noise into her damaged psyche without interruption. She was contaminated, Drael argued. Her perceptions had been warped by prolonged exposure to an alien consciousness that the Velthari mind was never designed to process. Her memories could not be trusted. Her interpretation of events could not be verified, and the human who had supposedly saved her could not be examined because human minds were opaque to the Council's methods. "You cannot convict on the testimony of a broken mind," Drael said, and his voice was smooth and reasonable, and his crystal gleamed with the polished confidence of a man who had been lying to powerful people his entire life. "Especially one that has been damaged by contact with a species we barely understand." The council judges shifted. Their crystal flickered with uncertain colors. Several of them glanced toward the gallery, where public opinion was being measured in real time by empathic monitors. The argument was working, not because it was true, but because it was plausible, and in politics, plausibility was often enough. Kaylin felt the tide turning. She felt the doubt spreading through the chamber like cold water, and she felt something inside her that was very close to despair. Then she closed her eyes, and she reached inward, past the fear, past the pain, past the damage that Drael had inflicted on her body and her career and her life. She reached for the one thing that had kept her alive through all of it, the memory of a human hand holding hers in the dark. She opened her eyes, and she spoke. "The Archon is correct about one thing," Kaylin said, and her voice was quiet, but the crystal chamber caught it and amplified it until every ear in the room could hear. "My mind was damaged. My lattice was broken. I was dying alone in the wreck of a ship that he left me in, and my telepathic abilities were shattered beyond anything I had ever experienced." She paused and let the truth of it resonate through the chamber. The judges could feel it, the raw, verified honesty of every word. And then a human found me. She turned slowly, not to face Drayle, but to face the judges, all 12 of them, one by one. His name is Elias Varro. He is a salvage operator. He has no rank, no title, no political connections. He is nobody by the standards that matter in this chamber. He is a human, which means his mind is loud and messy and completely without structure. He broadcasts every emotion he has ever felt at full volume, at all times, and he cannot stop, and he does not know how. A murmur ran through the gallery. Kalen ignored it. When he found me, I was in agony, and my broken lattice was sending that agony outward in uncontrolled waves. He has no telepathic shielding. He felt all of it, every fracture, every moment of pain, as if it were his own body breaking. And he did not leave. Her crystal was glowing now, brighter than it had in weeks, the colors shifting through shades that the gallery had never seen before. Not the clean single tones of normal Velthari expression, but something richer, something layered and complex, as if her time with the human had taught her crystal a new language. He built a resonance chamber from mining equipment and engine parts. He taught himself Velthari medicine from a database he could barely understand. He worked for 3 days without sleep, holding my hand through the worst of it, while my pain was burning through his unprotected mind, like fire. And when I asked him why a human with no obligation and no alliance and nothing to gain would do this for a stranger, he said something that I have not been able to stop thinking about. She paused, and the chamber was absolutely silent. He said, "You were hurt. You were alone. That is enough." The silence deepened. The Archon tells you that my mind was contaminated by contact with a human, that my perceptions were warped, that I cannot be trusted because I spent weeks immersed in the chaos of an alien consciousness. Her voice grew stronger. He is wrong. My mind was not contaminated. It was opened. I spent weeks inside the mind of Elias Varro, and I learned something that no Veltari has ever learned, because no Veltari has ever been close enough to a human for long enough to see it. She stepped forward, and the crystal floor sang beneath her feet. Human empathy is not like ours. It is not automatic. It is not built into their biology. They cannot feel what we feel. They cannot sense our pain or our fear or our loneliness. They are blind in ways that we would consider a disability. And yet they help. They help not because they can feel our suffering, but because they choose to imagine it. They construct empathy from nothing, from will and principle and a stubborn refusal to look away from someone who is hurting. She turned now to Drayle, and his silver crystal flickered for the first time. The Archon asks you to dismiss my testimony because a human touched my mind. But I tell you that what Elias Varro did is the most profound act of empathy I have ever witnessed in my life. More profound than anything produced by our telepathic web. More profound than anything this council has ever felt in 3,000 years of reading minds. Because he did it blind. He did it without proof that I was worth saving. He did it with nothing but the conviction that a person in pain deserves to not be alone. She opened her mind. She opened it fully, without reservation, without filter, and the chamber blazed with light as every memory she carried poured outward into the crystal amplifiers and into the minds of every judge and every observer in the chamber room. They felt what she had felt. They felt the wreckage and the dark and the loneliness of being deliberately forgotten. They felt the moment the human appeared, his mind a roaring fire of chaotic warmth in the freezing silence. They felt his hands on the cutting torch, steady and sure, while the reactor counted down behind him. They felt the cargo bay and the makeshift resonance chamber and the 3 sleepless nights. They felt his terror in the corridor on Meridian Station, and the iron core of principle that held him in place when every survival instinct told him to run. And, They felt the one thing that Kaylin had carried with her, from the moment he first held her hand. The overwhelming, impossible, illogical kindness of a creature who could not feel her pain and helped her anyway. The council was silent for a very long time. When the verdict came, it came unanimously. Archon Drael was stripped of rank. His diplomatic immunity was revoked. His assets were frozen, and his personal files were seized. The bioweapons plot was exposed in full, and the arms treaty was suspended, pending a complete renegotiation with independent oversight. Drael was remanded to a detention facility to await trial on charges of attempted murder, weapons trafficking, and conspiracy against the peace. He did not speak as they led him away. His silver crystal had gone dark. Kaylin walked out of the council chamber on legs that were still not entirely steady, and she found Elias in the waiting room. He was sitting on a bench, with his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands, and he looked up when she came through the door. He did not ask how it went. He did not ask what she said. He just looked at her with those tired human eyes and reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a ration bar. The same terrible, tasteless, vacuum-sealed ration bars he had been sharing with her for weeks. He held it out to her. She took it, and through the end, bond that had formed between them, faint and imperfect and unlike anything in Valtari science, a connection born not of crystal resonance, but of shared suffering and stubborn kindness, and weeks of a loud human mind pressing against a broken alien one until something new grew in the space between. She let him feel one thing. Not gratitude for saving her life, though she felt that too. Gratitude for showing her that the loudest mind in the galaxy could also be the gentlest. Elias smiled. He did not fully understand what she was sending him, but he felt something warm settle in his chest, like sunlight on a cold morning, and that was enough. It was always enough. They sat together on the bench in the waiting room of the oldest building on a world that was not his, eating terrible ration bars, and neither of them said anything for a while, because some things did not need words. She had been wounded and abandoned, left to die in the dark between stars. Protocol. Every alliance, every species she had ever trusted had failed her. The systems built to protect her had been the very systems used to erase her. And she had lain in the wreckage of everything she believed in, and she had waited to die. And then the human found her, and he stayed.